bit about the history of egg tempera, and then I'll show you my working process, because just as in oil or watercolor, every artist has their own approach and way of working. Tempera, you kind of have to prepare a little more than in some other media, because you can't like paint. Well, it's kind of like watercolor in the sense that you just can't correct mistakes by painting over it. You have to actually get like a razor blade and scrape back down to the gesso if you need to actually like move something or change something materially. So I'm gonna start. I'm gonna share my screen and get going. So.
Oops. Okay. I'm sorry. Why isn't that working? Eileen, unmute yourself, please. I hit it by accident.
Okay.
And ladies, Karen and Kathy, please keep yourself muted. I've muted you. Please leave it that way.
Okay. So I call this little presentation Art, Ancient and Modern, because egg tempera is like a very, it's an ancient medium. Actually, they have found that some of, like as far back as the Fayum Egyptian mummy paintings have some egg tempera. They're mostly done in encaustic, but they have found some that had egg protein in them, which indicated that they were done by, done with egg tempera, and they were more detailed. Tempera is, you can see the details here. This is like a close-up of a painting. See all the little marks? It's made up of marks. That's because when you put your brush to the panel, it dries instantly. So there's no blending or swishing around like you can in oil and watercolor. You have to create gradations by changing the color and gradually shifting. It's kind of like doing pen and ink in color. So, but I'm going to start out with how I ended up doing this. So let me just get my little thingy here. Oh, just trying to get to the next. Oh, okay. So I went to art school in the 70s, in the mid 70s, when everything was about conceptual art and minimalist art and non-objective painting. And of course, everybody ends up going to art school because they love to draw, they love to paint, and then you get there and they spend the 4 years talking you out of it. So I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. This is what I came out doing. This was I was hanging, this is the shot of me hanging my first exhibition at Thompson Park, the old Thompson Park Visitor Center. If any of you remember, before the building burned down, they used to have 2 big galleries on the ground floor. And this was my first solo exhibition when I was 23. I did this for a number of years. Like right after this show, these works went directly to the Brooklyn Museum. I was included in a show there. It was quite amazing for somebody my age. Of course, we didn't know anything, we didn't invite the press. We thought they would just show up. We had no idea about press releases and that sort of thing. But, and I did this for about 5 years after I graduated, but I really, really missed drawing and narrative. I really have that narrative impulse to do art that tells stories. So I had a good education, we had anatomy. I mean, I even was at Columbia Medical School drawing from cadavers, we did the whole thing, a lot of drawing, a lot of theory. But there was this real push against realism in those days. So I was working, as a temp I was still living in New York City, and I went to the Art Students League at night to brush up on my drawing skills and kind of get, where I needed to go. And so then I kind of just taught myself old master painting techniques, basically out of books. So, so this is the sort of thing I was doing. you'll have to forgive, you were talking about digitizing slides. These were 35mm slides that I digitized. So they're a little bit, faded. So this was like an 18 by 24 still life done in oil. But I did grease eye underpaintings and glazes and, the whole thing. And then here's a larger one. These figures are life size. So that's like a 48 by 60 canvas. And I got, really into, obviously drawing and figures and myths and, all kinds of interesting stuff. And then this was the whole series I did. Was some of my last solo shows that I did in oil. These are also life size. I got really into rendering different kinds of fabric, and this was an antique fire screen that I did this whole series of women behind the fire screen. And I was part of a gallery. I was in a gallery in Jersey City, but unfortunately it closed. And but back when I was in art school, I was introduced to the work of a painter, a realist painter named George Tooker, who was a sort of a social realist. He was concerned with social issues. He marched with Martin Luther King down in Alabama, but he was an egg tempera painter, and I had never seen anything like that kind of work. And a friend of mine introduced me to his work. You may recognize this. I believe it's in the Whitney. It's called Subway. He was painting in the 50s. This was from the 50s when when abstract expressionism reigned supreme. But I just loved his work, partly because of the subject matter. But it was kind of all about the anxiety of the Cold War and all of that sort of stuff. And then later he got more, you can get some, beautiful effects with tempera. It has quite a luminous quality from all the layers of paint. So, but I could find nobody to teach me. I found books on it, but it was all this, you have to make the panels with the rabbit skin glue and the chalk or the marble dust and double boilers. And I was 20, and I was like, I am not going through all that. So I had bought pigments and I just gave up. And then years and years later, I decided to give it a try. But here are some, Botticelli worked in tempera. Filippo Lippi worked in tempera. So, it was very, in wide use. There was no oil paint at this time. It just was not available. It hadn't been, it started earlier in northern, Europe, like in Brussels and, and Belgium, in the Flemish school. It didn't hit Italy until much later. All of the work in the medieval period, like a lot of the illuminated manuscripts that you see, those are done in tempera and then gold leaf and ink, inks. But in the 1400s to 1450, which is the early Renaissance, it became, that's how they painted panel paintings. And you could see close up a little bit, you could see how linear it is. It's sort of like you make a drawing and then you fill it in, but it's layers and layers and layers, but you can see the level of detail that you can get. And what happened was, as oil painting came in, they discovered, it stays wet for a couple of days. You could blend flesh tones. There was this drive to make things look more naturalistic and real, which was difficult in egg tempera, because you had to make transitions. You had to make many layers and cross hatch and go from light to dark, in that manner. What happened at first, people were doing their underpaintings in egg tempera, and then they were glazing the oils over them. But then gradually they did a shift, like all the way to using oil, and tempera went out of favor. And then here's, of course, another example. This is the close-up of Christina's World by Andrew Wyeth. And you can see, see the details, how you can get that detailed. I mean, it's not that you can't do that level of detail in oil, but it's a whole lot easier in tempera because the surface is dry already. It's you can get very fine brushes, and the paint is like sort of the consistency of India ink. So that there was a renaissance of tempera around 1900 when the English people discovered Italy, and it became the thing to go travel in Italy, and they started seeing all these early panel paintings, and for some reason they just had a real affinity for those. So there was an egg tempera society that started in the early 1900s in Great Britain. And so this was like really the first time, except for icon painters had continued the tradition. The Russian and Greek Orthodox icon painters had continued using tempera, but no one ever saw them. So they weren't known to many people. So they started having exhibitions. And then in the 1920s in the US, Daniel V. Thompson, who was an art historian who taught at Yale, he translated the original text by Cennino Cennini from Italian, early Italian, into English, and it had all of the recipes and methods for painting an egg tempera. So, and he started teaching an egg tempera course at Yale. So that's where Tooker learned it. Paul Cadmus, if you know him, Jared French, and through them, I don't think Wyeth was at Yale, but I think he had friends who were in Thompson's class, and he tried it, and it was, just what he was looking for. So, and then that just sort of continued to this day. Daniel Thompson wrote his own book on the practice of egg tempera, which I use to this day. Now this, I'm just putting this drawing in here. This is a silver point drawing because I also work in silver point, and a lot of the Renaissance tempera painters, they did an underdrawing on their panel, and they often use silver point. In those days, there was no graphite. So if you wanted to do fine detailed work, you did it with, you either did it with pen and ink, or you did it with silver point. And silver point is, it's actually, you take a piece of silver wire, like jeweler's wire, and you use it like lead, and you draw with it. You have to coat the surface so that the silver will react. It doesn't react, it has to have something on the surface that's harder than silver. And so, and the beautiful thing about silver point drawing, it's very delicate. You can't get a wide range of values. It's very kind of difficult to do that. But just as your silver jewelry or your silverware tarnishes, the drawing tarnishes, and it gets a little darker. It gets a deep, like a warm brown. It starts out very cold gray. And in my drawings, it depends on what's in the atmosphere at the time, how humid it is, what surface you're painting on, you're drawing on. I can see the difference like from one day to the next, which is sort of interesting. So so this is what's behind me, was normally behind me now in my studio, but I've moved it all to a table so to better facilitate the camera. When I was, I would say around 2012, about 2011, 2010, I had gotten divorced, and I had to take a full-time job so I could get benefits, and I was helping put my son through college. And so I had this crazy full-time job, which didn't give me a lot of time to paint, but the benefit was that for the first time in my life, I actually had paid vacations. So, and we had the internet by then, so I could actually find people who would teach me egg tempera. I said, well, I can't commit to exhibitions right now. I have to, sort of take a step back, and this would be a great time to like try new things. So I did the research and I found I did one workshop up in Maine with a painter called Phil Shermer, amazing painter. That was just a weekend, but it gave me enough, for me to learn how to handle the paint to get me going. And then after that, I found another amazing teacher, an amazing artist, Koo Shadler. She's up in New Hampshire. She does week-long workshops because you can't finish a painting in even a small painting in less than a week. And, she kind of speeds us along in a week, on a very small, like 5x7 panel. So we learned what we needed to learn. I work large for a lot of tempera painters. So my pieces take me pretty solid working 4 months to paint. So you can't produce a lot of work. So if you're the sort of person that likes to, do a painting a day or a week or whatever, this would not be the medium for you. But you could see in the background there, that's my I do a silver point study first. So that's my the silver point, and then this is a work in progress, which is now finished. So you can see all the pigments, the dry pigments come in jars, and there's my egg yolk there, and and all my brushes. So I make my own panels. You can buy them now ready made, which I couldn't back when I was in my 20s and was, wanted to do this. This was a big stumbling block, making the panels. But then, when I first started, I bought them, but they would get little pinholes in them that weren't, and that doesn't become, obvious until you started painting, and then you have this like little white dot in the middle that you can't fill in. It's like really annoying. So these are the materials that I use to make my panels. I use Baltic birch. So here's the right down here, you see the plywood down there. And then you make the gesso. It's a homemade gesso. You cannot use acrylic gesso. It's the wrong absorbency. It just won't work. So you have to make the old time, what they call true gesso, made from, I use rabbit skin glue and marble dust and distilled water. And it's like sort of like a 5-day process. I mean, it's not 5 days of working, but you have to let the glue soak overnight, then you have to let the fabric. And I put a layer of linen that's like very, very fine, like handkerchief linen. If you're using wood rather than masonite, you need to do that because the grain can telegraph through the gesso over time. So you don't want that to happen if you're putting all that effort into work. So, and then here's my little electric scale, and there's my pot. It has to be kept warm in like a little double boiler because the glue becomes, it's like Jello. It's like white Jello at room temperature. So to keep it liquid, because you have to paint like 9 layers of gesso on both sides of the panel, and you have to keep it liquid to keep it going. So and there's my little book down here. I print this off on my computer and put the days on it, because if you forget a step, you could really mess up and you've wasted a lot of time. So I check everything off as I do it to make sure that I did everything. And then you start to prepare your meeting. Now I'm going to show you this live once I get through this presentation. So you have to separate your eggs. You only use the egg yolk to make tempera paint. And you have to get all the white off of it. So because the egg whites are very brittle, it would make paint that's very brittle. So on this next slide, you'll see I put the yolk on a piece of paper towel, and I have to kind of roll it around, and then I poke it and break it into my little baby food jar. Then my pigments are they come right out of the ground. There's some really great companies that provide these pigments, and they give you tremendous amount of information. But a lot of egg tempera painters, they create what's called pigment paste. So they'll mix up a whole batch of like Venetian red and mix it with water till it's about like the consistency of toothpaste, and put it in like a little airproof, jar. And then they'll just take it out and mix it with the yolk when they need it. You can't mix it ahead of time with the yolk because it would putrefy and it will really stink. So you add the egg yolk as you're painting, just like a watercolor artist adds water as they're painting. So like watercolor, you have these same pigments that I'm using here now, but the binder is gum arabic. In oil paint, it's these same pigments that I'm using here, except your binder is linseed oil. And of course, the big companies, they add stabilizers and all kinds of other stuff to them. There are egg tempera, that you might have heard of. I think Rowney makes them. You buy them in little tubes. It's not true egg tempera. It's called that's what's called tempera grassa, because they have added oil to it, because you cannot just put egg and pigment in a jar, in a tube, because it will again, it will putrefy. So they do an emulsion by adding they add a little bit of oil to it, and it doesn't behave, it behaves similar to true egg tempera, but not totally. So what I do is, I got this trick from my teacher, because keeping everything in little jars and putting it out, and if I'm coming home, I work part-time at a job, I want to come home and be able to start painting right away. So the problem with the pigments is inhalation of dust. You don't want to be inhaling dust. So like when I'm actually, mixing, straight from the jar, I wear a dust mask. Most of the colors I use are not, they're not poisonous, but you have to be, I do have cadmium red, and I do have chrome yellow, and those are colors I rarely use. But what I do is I put the powdered pigments in these little these little porcelain palettes, and I add enough water to them to make them, they become sort of like crumbly watercolor cakes. And it just makes it so there's no dust. And when I'm ready to paint, I just come home and I put a few droppers full of distilled water on the colors that I want to use in that session, and they're soft like within within a few minutes. So that's how I work. And then, just if you're curious about silver point, here is a couple of silver point styli, and then you have to use a ground, but you can use golden makes a ground, you can use acrylic gesso, you can use designer's gouache or Chinese white. All of those will give you a silver point mark. So you could just paint it, and then you could you probably want to sand it a little bit, but those I'm actually using this ground now. It's a beautiful smooth ground, and like if normally I would be able to pass around a panel of one of my egg tempera panels. So it's brilliant white because I use white marble dust as my whiting, but it's as smooth as a piano key. That's what the panel is like. If you buy them pre-made, they have a little more of a pebbled finish to them, because they spray paint the gesso on in a factory. So and I prefer not to use that anymore, now that I know how to make my own. So this is like one of my very first egg tempera paintings. So you can see the marks. These marks are quite big. I was just getting going. And this is quite small. I think it's like 5 by 7 or 8 by 10, something, something like that. But, I just plunked a really nice golden roll down in front of me and started painting. So, but you can see, you can get quite a luminous effect, because egg tempera is, even though, it looks solid, the paint is very, very thin. The entire painting is painted with the tip of a brush. So it's layers and layers and layers. And so the light goes through to that white background and refracts back out again. And you can get some pretty incredible effects. and you can see the level of detail that you can get. And this is another one of those very, very early ones. So these are horseshoe crab molts. I was working for a nonprofit at the time. I was the deputy director of the American Littoral Society out on Sandy Hook. So I got really into horseshoe crab research, and I had to do a lot of their writing. So I was writing newsletters about horseshoe crabs, but I got to take samples home. So I had good stuff to paint. And then I got more involved. You know, I felt confident that I could handle the paint. So this is like a little, this is 20 by 30, this piece, which is a little ambitious. And that's my niece, Callie. She posed for a whole series of drawings for me. And so this was called Wednesday. It was a very, I thought I was so clever. And then this is called BFFs. These are people that I grew up with, and I apologize, Sharon, that you were not in here, but you weren't around. You were in Illinois, so I took a whole series of photos of my girlfriends, and I wanted to get across. We had known each other since grammar school, high school, whatever. And at this point, we were in our late 50s, and I said, okay, I can make us thin, but if I make us thin, we all have to have gray hair. So, because I wanted to get across the, you know, how long we had been friends. So, but you know, I was sort of influenced by the Renaissance paintings that I was seeing, you know, where they were always sitting in a window, where they were kind of framed, and with landscapes or seascapes in the background. And but I really wanted to, you know, I got interested, you know, I wanted to paint lace, so I painted that lace border across the top. Egg tempera is kind of interesting because you're working on a panel, you could like lean on it, and what you would do is I you know, do a drawing to start with, a detailed drawing, a value drawing, but then I do take a tracing of the of the outlines, and I, you know, transfer it on to the panel. I actually make my own transfer paper, you know, using pure pigment and denatured alcohol, painted on like pieces of really heavy duty tracing paper. So that, because if you use, like, anybody ever use Sorrel, like that transfer paper, it comes red. It's like carbon paper for artists, but it's red, it's blue, it's yellow, or it's black. And they do have white, but those colors are so solid and bright, it would take weeks to cover them with egg temper paint. It is so thinly applied. So so I make my own with very kind of muted colors. But what I did was, you know, I painted this whole, you know, the background, and then I take my drawing again and lay it back on here and use white transfer paper to kind of block in the lace after I, you know, so I don't have to like go in and paint all these like little tiny little holes, which watercolor artists have to do. Well, they can use Frisket, but but it was similar to that idea. So you can paint things in layers. So like here for this shawl, I painted just the solid, you know, the solid sort of that kind of beige color, and get the lights and the darks in, and then add in the pattern after I've got that established. So, you know, you just have to sit and think about your attack, you know, what your approach is going to be. And so here's sort of like one from beginning to end. So like sometimes I'll hire a model. So this woman, the children I sort of made up, but this young woman came and she posed on my dining room table, leaning against a wall, because in the painting she's going to be leaning against a tree. So, you know, I had to do the setup. I had the lighting the way I wanted to do it, and then when I got it the way I wanted, like then, you know, I added in the rest of the background. They were in a forest. This is called Wetlands. It's after a place where we used to play after school when I was a kid. out in Middletown, like right outside of Red Bank. So this was kind of near Porsey Pond and, that kind of area. So this is what I would use. So then I would transfer the bare outlines of this to my silver point drawing. So this is the silver point drawing, which I fully resolved and work out all the lights and darks and how I'm going to do that. And then I use the same tracing again, except I decided to change where the children were. I think I moved them higher, but here is the finished painting. So so you can have like a lot of detail. I mean, you have to, you go into sort of a meditative state to like do this work. So this, not including the drawings, this would have been like 4 or 5 months of painting 25 to 30 hours a week. So, it's especially when it's detailed like this. So again, I painted the dress in just white to start with, to get the form and the volume nailed down. And then I added, the pattern, afterwards. And once we got some, solidity there. So, but it's kind of fun. Again, this one is a very pale silver point drawing. I tried a new ground that I hadn't used. It was Golden's ground, and I found you couldn't get as dark as you can on other surfaces. So so this is called Circus Summer. When I was, you'll be able to see this better. When I was a kid growing up, I lived across the street from a farm, and the farmer let the Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers Circus come and set up in the farm, on his farm across the street from my house, every other summer in June. So then after they left, we kids would play circus in the backyard all summer. We would like sew sequins on our underwear and balance on my father's sawhorse. But all the way back here, this circus tent, I actually took from, my mom still had photos in the family album that she took of the circus when it came to town. So, and then I have a little elephant there and little cars like parked there. So this was kind of fun to paint. And this was the same model as the other other painting. So her name is Katie. She was a regular model at the Art Alliance in Red Bank. I belong to a group that drew and painted together every Wednesday night for years. I mean, they've been going for more than 40 years, since before the Art Alliance. So, but then I would hire her to come pose in my own house. So, and then here's one, I wanted to get into multiple figures and try things with, lighting effects and different kinds of effects that you can do with it. So this is called Folk Festival. I'm a mandolin player. I play in a little band now. And, but when I was a teenager, we had the Middletown Folk Festival that used to come every summer, like right up the street from my house, so we could walk there. And this was sort of based on my memories of that. Though that was like 18 by 24. And this is, so occasionally I'll do a small still life. You can do amazing things, with, rendering different surfaces and textures and, and detail. So these were just some shells. This was actually because I was going to do a demo. I did a silver point drawing and I said, oh, I kind of like that. So I'll turn it into a painting. This one is called Washington Square. This is 18 by 24. When I was a young woman living in New York City, I had friends that were street musicians, and they would perform in Washington Square, down at South Ferry, and different places in the city, and I would pass the hat for them sometimes. That was my big contribution. My friend, this guy was a ventriloquist. He made his own puppets, and I'm still in touch with him. He lives in Rockford, Illinois. He's retired now. And then this This is a study for one that's called Dona Nobis Pacem. It was inspired by Ralph Vaughan Williams' choral masterwork, which I was doing a sing-along with the Mama Civic Chorus. And it was the first time I had heard the piece, and it sent chills down my spine. So it took me a year to figure out how to, get out what I wanted. So I did it in silver point. And then I made some changes when I did the painting. So this is the painting. That's actually my son, posed as the soldier. I used a World War I uniform. And actually the painting was nearly complete. And I said, that's just really empty up there. And I said, he needs to have his rifle. So I had to go research the rifles, how big they were, and figure out to get the right scale. It took really a long time to to cover the brick to make the rifle show. But what I did was I drew it to scale on a piece of tracing paper. Then I transferred the drawing right over the brick. And then another difference I made was, the brick had the white mortar, and it just didn't work here. So what I did was I put moss between all the bricks and every little bit of moss. And then down here, I felt that the grass was too plain. So I went out in my yard, which has very little real grass. It's mostly weeds. And I picked something of everything and brought them in and just sat them on the table and painted them in onto the, onto this. So I got this little carpet because it sort of reminds me of Botticelli's ground, like when he did the spring, La Primavera. So I always get inspired by the old masters. And then this was the piece that you saw that was in progress. This is part of a Four Seasons. I did the Four Seasons as I remember them growing up in coastal Monmouth County. So this is summer. It's called Woman with Horseshoe Crab. This is winter, skating on, we called it Foo Lake, but it's also known as Porsey Pond, right outside of Red Bank off of Navesink River Road. We would run home from school and, in those days, the lakes froze, for a good part of the winter. I mean, we skated on the river, even in the tidal water, Shadow Lake, the Navesink River, and this pond. So this was the Cardinals that they stayed around all winter. And then this is spring, girls with snowdrops and robins. My sister actually, she goes hiking in, I think it's Porsey Park, and they have trails, and she brought this photo back, and it had these, it was just this, it was early spring, it was wild crocuses, snowdrops. I added the dandelions because I just thought it needed something, and all these dried leaves. So it took me forever to paint that. And each one of these does have a silver point drawing that goes with it. And then this is fall, playing in leaves with the Canadian geese. But so two of these pieces, spring and summer, are actually in an exhibition right now down in, it's called the Calvert Marine Museum. Down in Solomons, Maryland. They have a show, a flora and fauna show. So I'm going to try to drive down to see the show next week. We had our opening on Zoom 2 Sundays ago. So, and then this was like the largest piece I've ever done. This is actually in an exhibition at Art Alliance right now in Red Bank. It's actually kind of in the window. So, you could, if you're downtown, it'll be up for another week. So this is called Bycatch. So once this was done, like started right before COVID, but I can't get models like to do this kind of, kind of stuff. So, I mean, I studied enough anatomy. I know the figure. Especially, and for the Four Seasons as well, I drew without models. So I just, was able to pose the figures however I wanted, come up with kind of, I love composing. Composition is what I love. And sometimes I spent almost 2 months working out this composition because I had to figure out how to get these 3 figures in there. And I had a lot of fun. I researched all the fish. These are Atlantic cod, because they had, I don't know if you could see it very well, but they have this beautiful speckle kind of burnt sienna speckled pattern on them, and so then bycatch. We did a lot of stuff with bycatch in marine conservation with unintended consequences, like when the tuna fishermen you know get dolphins in their nets, and so the dolphins are the bycatch, unintended species that you're catching. So here we got a lady instead of a different kind of fish. But I sort of took the biblical reference too, where Christ said, I'm going to make you fishers of men. So we got fishers of ladies. So, but I did have a lot of fun. And then I, decided that this female character, there's something about if somebody has a cigarette in their hand, it changes the whole character of everything. It's just what people bring their own stuff to it. But I just thought it was really cool. So I just had fun doing that. So, but it took a long time. It took more than 6 months, and I started it before the lockdown, and I finished it during it. So I was actually back to work, but I finished it in October of last year, early October. So, and then this is my most recent piece. So while the whole lockdown thing was going on, we had all these reports, for those of you who live in this area, of the nearshore sightings of humpback whales, which is not that usual for here. That evidently they have been frequenting the Jersey Shore farther offshore for the last 4 or 5 years, but we weren't hearing about it as much. And I said, man, that is something I've always wanted to do. So I called my old boss at the Littoral Society and I said, so where can I come and see whales? I want to do a whale picture. And he said, well, you really can't count on going, seeing them like standing on Sandy Hook or whatever. He said the best thing to do is get on a whale watching boat. And he told me who the best one was to go out on. And I went out, I booked a trip. It was in the middle of the week, so there was hardly anybody on the boat and everybody was like socially distant. I was like totally by myself. And I took some of my own pictures. Like I took this picture of, I got the tail. No whales breached though, they didn't come all the way out of the water. So I took what photos I had, and then from when I worked at the Littoral Society, a man that I used to work with is an amazing naturalist and wildlife photographer. He used to run the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, and he runs whale watching trips up in Gloucester, Mass, for the society. So I said, Don, do you have any good photos of a breaching whale? And he sent me amazing photos of a humpback whale almost totally out of the water with the Manhattan skyline in the background. I mean, it was in the harbor. So he let me use it. So here's like a little Silver Point study. This is just of this whale. And of course I stylize the water. My aim is not to be photorealistic. I go more for the Renaissance, the early Renaissance, where it was still quite linear and use patterns and whatnot. And so, I just started drawing people. I didn't know what to do. And so this woman, of course, this is an early sketch. And of course, like, the thing that drove me crazy, her head was too big, so I have a whole series of drawings that I did. And I worked out the patterns. I said, oh, it would be great if she was making music. And so I play the mandolin, but a friend gave me a violin because I was learning how to play the fiddle. It's the same fingering and notes and everything. So I had a violin I could copy, and I did go online and see, what would be what positions, would look good. And then I put the kids in, and then, but this is the Silver Point drawing. So it's, so you have like, this was his picture. This was his picture, one of Don's photos, and then these two in the background were mine. And so it was quite challenging. And then I have all the seagulls, because when the whales come up, they're usually feeding, and they feed on menhaden, which are bunker. If you've heard of bunker, they're bait fish, but they all come up out of the water when the whales come up, so the seagulls follow them.
humpback whales breaching in.
Yeah. So, oh, let me go back. Oh, wrong way. Okay. So here's a close-up of the heads of her head in this silver point. And you can kind of see, it's hard to see because it's so faint, but you know, the hair is blowing, you get a lot, very, very detailed. And I actually had to like hang the sweater in the, I have trouble. I love doing like textures, like sweaters and that sort of thing, but getting the pattern right is like, oh my God, does that go over or under? So I actually have to have it sitting in front of me so I can look at it. And then here is an early, very early stage of the egg tempera painting. So egg tempera painting, you kind of paint all over, and it's kind of like watching, if you remember the old Polaroids, that we, you know, where you would watch the color fade, you know, appear on the, that's what a tempera painting is like. It's just a gradual clarity. So you could see very faint, you know, the yellow sweater and little bit of color there. And so just so you can get an idea, I work on a turntable because the marks that I make show, and I don't cross hatch, I just make, you know, marks that I follow the form of the object with my marks. And it gets really hard to try to do that on an easel or, so I do a lot of the work on a turntable that I could spin around. You'll see that when I do the demo. And so that I can, so that's why you can see that this shadow here, because it's on a turntable. That's the sort of brush I use. So you imagine this whole painting was painted with a brush like that. So some of the early layers you can sponge on. You can't like take a big brush and paint, you know, tempera on. It streaks, you know, because it's drying as the brush is going across, not good. So, and some people do, they'll do a very, very thin wash and they might, you know, use a really big soft brush. And then, but then you have to wait a little while, you know, even though the paint is dry, the gesso isn't dry, it can soak through. So you have to wait for that to dry because you get lifting. But this is just to give you an idea of the scale of the brush and whatnot. And then here's my setup. And so here is, you know, the dress. You can see all the little marks. This is layers and layers and layers. The whole thing is, but it's so many colors in here. Well, there's blue, there's yellow, there's different kinds of violet. I mix it optically by alternating layers of blue and like say, ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, but then I actually get colors that are, you know, that are violet. And right when I was almost done, the paint companies where I buy my pigments are like, they're very sneaky. You know, they send these beautiful emails with these beautiful little jars and these amazing colors in them. And of course, you're sitting there looking at it, oh, click, I'll buy that, you know. It's like, but this is, so what's very unusual is this is actually ochre. It's an ochre, it's Armenian purple ochre. So it's an ochre just like yellow ochre that comes out of the ground. But it has, according to the natural pigments who sell this, it had, I forget what it is, the red that makes burnt sienna, something dioxide, iron, a lot of iron in it, which made it go more toward violet. So here you can see it mixed, but it's not like a violet, it's a very, you know, very subtle kind of smoky violet. And I was able to work that in the last couple of layers, and it just, you know, made this skirt. So, and so then here, you know, here is the head like in an earlier state. And then here it is, not totally complete, but you can see I added on like the little tendrils blowing in the wind. It's you know, the detail that you can do. And I waited till near the end to add the ribbon. I mean, the ribbon was intended, but it's better to get all this background in here, you know, the ripples and, you know, all of that taken care of before you, otherwise you have to paint, you know, all these like little spaces and you get that halo look, you know, from going around it. So I painted this over that paint. So because especially if it's a color that has white in it, you know, it has more covering power than some of the other colors. So one thing, you know, I painted in oil for 35 years before I did this, but it was so much easier to make the transition than if I was just starting from scratch, because all of the principles that you learned in painted, whether it's watercolor or oil, you know, all the things that you have to contend with, like the staining power of a color, you know, like everybody knows Prussian blue takes over. You know, you have to be careful with it. It's the same thing here. All of the qualities that you have in your paints are from the pigments themselves, not from anything else that gets mixed in with them. So you know, some are too subtle, some are, you know, some like terra vert, you know, is a very, very weak color. But then titanium white covers, like, you know, like there's no tomorrow. So anything that has titanium white in it, you know, is going to cover really, really well. So all of those things that you learn still apply, except you don't have to worry about fat over lean because there's no oil. So and then here's some of the detail in the water. So like you can see how I follow the form with my marks, and the same here. Oh, how many hours. I can't tell you how many audiobooks I listen to. So I listen to maybe 5 a week, you know, well, when I'm painting full time, and it's like, and I'll listen to music, and there's some great podcasts I listen to, but I really had fun with this water. So and then here's the finished piece. So this, I had hoped to have it actually here tonight, but it's still at the framers. So he's kind of backed up. Everybody in the world is framing everything. All the people that are moving out of the city to buy houses here are framing everything. So I, you know, I really had a lot of fun with this. So and I think I'm going to do another whale painting. I'm working on something different now. I'm already almost done with the silver point drawing for my next piece. But so that is that. And so if you follow, you know, if you want, you could follow me on Instagram. I actually post progress shots of all my work, from the tiniest little sketches to all of the you know, to the under drawings, to the paintings in progress. Even if I make a mistake, you know, I'll cover how I fixed it, or what I did, what I changed. So I post like at least probably like every other day, like when I'm, you know, working on a painting. Sometimes the progress is so minimal, you know, you can't tell that anything happened, only I could tell. But and then I have a website, so you could always check my website to see. I haven't been so great at keeping it up lately, but it's, you know, it has like if I'm having a show, or, you know, that kind of thing. And I did send, I'm not sure if it was sent out to you yet or not, but I sent out a handout that is going, if it hasn't already been shared with you, it will be shared with you, that has where I get my supplies, what are some books that you could read if you want to find out more about, you know, the different techniques of tempera, and then who teaches, you know, if you want to go on a week-long workshop, there's some great ones here in the US. But then, you know, once COVID's over, you know, there's some amazing teachers that take people to Rome and Florence, and you go paint for 2 weeks or whatever. There's one gentleman who's doing one next week, I think, out on Whidbey Island in the Pacific Northwest. You know, they're great teachers. And I even go, I mean, I don't do the traveling ones, but I still go back to the woman who taught me, Koo Shadler, who taught me this, because she has this beautiful studio in a bucolic on a farm in New Hampshire. And sometimes I just like to get away for like a week and go paint with other tempera painters. And also on that, there are Facebook groups. There's a Facebook group called patrons and artists and painters of egg tempera, and it's tempera painters from around the world, all around this group. And of course, the paintings take so long that, you know, people don't post that often. So, but, you know, you see a variety of stuff. And that's how I've gotten into some exhibitions. And there's another one for Silver Point. Those are listed on that sheet too. I've gotten curated into shows like right off of that site. So, you know, I find it interesting, and people trade tips, and if somebody's just starting out, you know, they can ask questions, and, you know, and there's also the Society of Egg Temperers. I think it's called eggtemper.com. They're no longer updating it, but it went for about 15 years, and there's a wealth of information, and they had just stopped updating it when I sort of felt like I had enough, my work was good enough to submit, and they never updated, they stopped updating, so I'm not on there. But so that's this part of the presentation, and I'm going to stop sharing now and go back to the real me. And I'm going to move my laptop off my table here so that the camera will show my hands, and you'll be able to see, and I'll start mixing paint and going through what I'm going to do. So Susan, did you need to say anything in between, or we just want me to go right ahead, or
Go right ahead.
does anybody need to take a break or a bio break? Okay, so I'm going to move this up here, and you won't see me anymore. You're going to see, this is going to be angled down at I just want to check this. Okay, that's pretty good. So, we're going to start out with mixing the paint. What do I do with my, oh, there's my eggs. Is this clear? Because, you know, with a laptop at an angle like this, it's hard for me to tell. I think I have to button.
It's clear.
Sorry about that. I realize we're going to see more décolletage than we should be. We're all friends. Okay.
Just curious, in your large painting, for instance, how many egg yolks do you end up using?
I calculated it once for a larger piece, probably about 4 dozen, you know, over 6 months. Really, I use 1 egg yolk will last me 2 or 3 days because I could refrigerate it overnight. So, and you use surprisingly little. In the early stages, if you're going to sponge on some layers, then you use a lot more to start with. But oh, and just so I can show you this is that book. I don't know if you could see. Could you see that?
Yep, the Craftsman's Handbook.
That's that the Craftsman's Handbook. It's the first translation of the Cennini book but it's really a fun book to read because it has all kinds of crazy stuff that they did back in the Renaissance times. Because there's a lot about like what artists need attitude adjustments. And I'm actually going to put my seat up higher so I could reach better. So what I have here, I have a little bowl here. Sometimes I use a coffee cup. I'm just going to take an egg and I'm going to crack it with a big spoon here. Everybody has their own way of doing this. And, you know, those of you who are cooks, I'm sure you have like this down, but it's a little bit different. You have to be a little careful because you're trying to get all the white off. You don't want the egg white. So we get as much of it off as we can. And then some artists take it and flip it back and forth in their hands. But it's really messy. So I roll it around on a piece of paper towel until it's quite dry. Sometimes it breaks. I want to get my little poking tool. I have a little poker here. Because then you have to pick up the, you don't want to get the sack in either. So you have to make sure you don't get that in there. Oh, this is so cooperating today. So I'm going to take this and poke that in. And the yolk will go in this. Baby food jars are awesome for this. So I always, every once in a while, I don't clean out the jar quick enough and it gets too icky to clean. And I have to go to the baby department in the supermarket and get a new, I find some kind of baby food that I could stand to eat and to get a new jar. So now this is quite thick. You'll see this is quite thick, really too thick for tempura. So what I need to do is the thinner that you use for tempura is water. And I use distilled water just because who knows what's in our water. Even, there's like fluoride and things like, which probably might be fine, but so I just use distilled water. So I mix enough so it's kind of like the consistency of India ink. And a little trick for doing this kind of work, which can't believe I never thought of, because this would be great for watercolor. I don't know how it'd be for oil, but instead of like dumping your brush in it, and we use eyedroppers, so a lot. So I just have gotten to know how much needs to go in here. Five, 6. Okay. Then I'm gonna. If you can get them, glass eyedroppers are better because they're way more easier to clean. And keep pipe cleaners on hand to clean them out because there's no other way to get them clean. I think this needs a little more. I have another clean one here. Okay, that's good. So I'm going to set this stuff aside. Get this out of here, put it behind me. Put my eggs back here. So I'll show you this. So like, here's the turntable. It's just a Lazy Susan, the kind that you get to put in your cabinet and put your spices on or whatever. So I just put my panel on that. So here's this is an in progress still life. I would say it's about, I don't know, 40% done, but I keep it around for doing demos because, if I'm not in the middle of, if I'm working on a painting at the time, I'll use whatever piece I'm working on. But here, but I'm not now. So I just finished one. Oh, this is right on the seam of this table. I'm going to have to do something about that. So let's see, I can spin it, when I work. So now I have I mix my paint. You can mix it on glass, on a slab of glass. I'm using, I have a really nice slab of marble. It's really, it's really nice. It's kind of heavy. This kind of came with a marble rolling pin that I have that I used from, my parents got me in Vermont, but I never used the slab. So that's, it's really nice and heavy. It doesn't move. And you can get these because now everybody's making all their bathrooms are being made out of marble tiles. So this is just like one of those foot square marble tiles, and you can just go to Home Depot and get one, you know, for like a couple of dollars. And so this is here. Here's like some. I'm just getting reorganized. I'm not in my normal workspace. So I'm going to bring this over for you to see. Here's a glass muller. Like you see everybody making their own paint and using these mullers to grind it. Really, when you buy most of the tempera, most of the pigments today, they're already ground. You don't have to go through all this. People just think it's cool to do, so they do it. But every once in a while, I do come across a pigment that is naturally more gritty, and I do use it for that. So, and then here are all my pigments. Here's like, this is another Lazy Susan with, you know, and I just rearranged them for the first time. You know, I started working when I started doing this. I bought one, then I bought another one, but they were kind of all higgledy-piggledy, and, you know, but I did know where all the colors were from habit, but now it's much more organized to have the yellows and the earth tones and the blues and greens and, you know, reds together. So, you're not going to be able to see this while I'm working because it's going to be off to the side. So to mix the paint, first I have to moisten some of these, and I think I'm going to do some yellow ochre, a couple of different colors. I have some deep yellow ochre, I have fawn, I have some very pale ochres. Now the trick to egg tempera, the word tempera comes from tempering the paint. So when you're mixing the paint with the medium, that's tempering the paint. So I use this nice, you know, a regular palette knife. However, you can't tell here, but this is like the second or third one I've been through. From mixing it on the marble with these pigments, it gets very, very thin and very, very sharp. You have to be careful. This is like a razor blade. It's so sharp now. So so the idea is I'll take some of these pigments, put them out on the palette. You don't need very much paint. It goes fairly, surprisingly, a long way. It's not that. I'm gonna put a little more water in that. Because I do so many figures, I go through yellow ochre like there's no tomorrow because I use so much of it mixing flesh tones. Okay, so I've got this laid out now. I'm going to move these out of the way so they're not in the way. This is my distilled water. So now I have there's a specific ratio. So you want a 1-to-1 mix of the egg yolk medium and pigment. So, and you really just have to get used to eyeballing it, and you have to take account, in account. This has a little more. And it's a little better to have too much than to have not enough, because if you don't have enough, it goes like chalk, and it can flake off. So then you just have to mix this and get it all mixed evenly through. So after you've done this mix, you got this 50-50 ratio. Once that's established, you can add as little or none or as much water to the water to this to thin it. So that way you can do glazes, you can do scumbles, you can put paint full strength. get this mixed up. And a lot of artists, you know, they'll want to mix their whole range of colors, like, because if they're working small, they're going to use a lot of colors. But these are quite large, and I'm only mixing the colors that I'm going to use like right now. Because they dry like gouache or watercolor. You know, I keep them moist but with the eyedropper, and I have a little spray thing that I can spray on it, like an acrylic artist would, you know, use to try to keep their palette wet. But once it dries, like unlike watercolor, you cannot reconstitute it. You have to get rid of it. So, you know, it's never going to mix again by adding water to it, because the egg will have polymerized and it's chemically changed. So I have like a whole little range of, and because I'm going to be adding this quite thinly, I'm going to add, and you work from, I kind of work from the middle ground out, but in a tempera painting, you're working from dark to light. So, you know, the lighter colors are going to be thicker and more opaque, and the darker colors are going to be a little thinner and more transparent. Put some water here, do some in this one too. And the only way you get to know how much water, it's your own preference, and it's just by trying it out. There's no, you know, rules that I can tell you, but again, you know, all of the same rules apply. Like some are more transparent, some are more opaque, just naturally. And you get the luminous effect in egg tempera by alternating layers of more opaque and more transparent colors. But there are hundreds of layers on these, but because they dry instantly. So I need a new paper towel. You always have to have a cloth or a paper towel in your hand, because egg tempera is a dry brush medium. You do not dip the brush in the paint and go right to your panel. You have to wipe the brush. You have to wipe off the brush. So I'm going to move a little closer to you all and pick out a brush. Where is my brush? So I just discovered they're quite new, I think. The Treco Brush Company makes this Protege series. And if any of you are watercolor artists, these are great for watercolor too, for detail. They're beautifully fine pointed. They stand up a long time, and all of these brushes are like $3.95 for, you know, everybody says, oh, the egg tempera artists, they have to use Series 7, you know, Kolinsky Sable Series 7 watercolor brushes. Yeah, you can, but it doesn't make that much difference. And because of the nature of the ground that this is on, and you're constantly doing you know, you really go, the biggest expense in egg tempera is the brushes, because you go through them fairly quickly. But I'm finding I did a whole painting with just two of these, practically 2 or 3 of these brushes, you know, painting for months. And so I'm gonna apply some paint to these rolls here. So I'm gonna go into some of the dark area. So get the paint on my brush. But notice I'm going to wipe it off. You have to do that every time. Otherwise, you get little blobs, and then you see I'm just I'm making little marks. I'm going all over this. So if you have some people get repetitive stress disorders with their hands, I think. And what I should do, I should show you this. Like, use a mahl stick, you know, when you oil paint, you can actually lean on this. You know, it's sturdy enough for you to lean on. But I took a really soft, like, isotoner glove, cut the fingers off so I can lean on here and not
Is there a color shift as it dries? I mean, does it get darker or lighter?
Not really. A tiny bit, but because it's layers and layers, you know, it's not as much as the acrylic paint dries down. And it gets a really quite beautiful eggshell sheen on it over time. So it's not glossy, but it's also not totally matte. Some people varnish their tempera paintings, but then it ends up like it, you know, so it makes it look like an oil painting. So like, then what's the point, you know? So, and you have to move. You can't stay working like on one little spot. It will soak it, and you'll get lifting, and you could get a big hole, you know, like a hole in the paint, and then you have to sort of very meticulously recreate the layers that you went, you know, to try to fix it. So the best thing to do is to avoid it. Now, some people, especially if they're working quite small and they need to work like in an area, you know, a concentrated area, they'll use a hair dryer to speed up the draw, you know, to make sure that it's, because it'll be instantly dry to the touch, but it's, you know, it'll be wetting the gesso underneath. So you have to be careful. But you have to be sure that you're not actually heating up the panel, because if you do that, then your underlying gesso can crack. So you just have to use it, you know, to be moving air. So then I'll do some here. Now, I'm not going to do too much painting here, because watching someone do egg tempera is like watching grass grow. So, you know, you're not going to see anything, but I just wanted to show you how I apply the paint, wiping it off. Oh, you know what? I want to see what happens. Does that bleach out the color too much for you?
Yeah, that's.
Is it all right? Okay. It's just that I can't see what I'm doing. And different tempera painters, if you take that handout and you go online and look at the different tempera painters, their application of paint is as different as night and day. You know, everybody has their own look. It all, you know, looks different. Michael Burke, who is like one of the masters, he does cross hatching. He's like, we're like the same age, and we were both in New York at the same time, but we've actually never met. I've been in an exhibition with him, but I've never actually met him. But he does amazing cross hatching. You know, his tempera painting. He does colored pencil drawings and egg tempera paintings, and he also does a lot of tempera painters do gold leaf. I think a lot of them do it because it's a way they sort of can bring back some of the medieval tempera painting styles, but it also means they don't have to paint that whole background. If they put gold leaf in the background, it really, you know, they can turn out paintings a lot quicker. But I like to do like a fully developed composition with depth, and so this is just what I spend my life doing. So if you don't like detail and you don't like that sort of meditative approach or layered approach, you know, this would not be a medium for you. But if you love incredible detail and you know, you just have that, it's a certain personality that can work on a piece and see it develop over months. Now, if you're, you know, I just decided I was almost 60 by the time I really got going with this. And I said, you know what, you know, I'm doing enough exhibiting. I'm happy with what I've done. I love these paintings. I love what I can do with it. And I just said, I'm just not going to worry about it. You know, I can't like get in a gallery because I can't produce 20 paintings a year. If I could produce 5 paintings, that's saying something. And 5 pieces actually, you know, because they take so long. So, but I'm exhibiting in some interesting group shows, and you know, I sell, but you know, usually if I go do a talk somewhere, someone gets the point of like, I charge, you know, what I charge because of how long they take. And even then, you know, it's sort of like minimum wage, but that's why I have another job. And then I'll put some in here. This is a reflection of these, so I'll try to keep the colors consistent. And maybe I'll do a little of one of the lighter colors. Do this real. This is a beautiful it's a beautiful, very pale ochre. It gets, you get this like buttery tone. And I have started to think in optical mixes. So you're actually working, I mean, my way of working is, even though it's on a much more granular level, I approach it the way the Impressionists did, where in many instances you're getting the color because of colors put next to each other that are mixing.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, if anybody wants to ask anything, I'm happy to answer.
I'm just, I love detail and stuff, but I'm so old. My paintings, because I do many portraits, but because if they take a day or two, that's a lot for me.
Yeah. And the hardest thing I found was transitioning from oil to this, was that I had to reduce the scale so much, because you can't do these really large. It just, you know, isn't just not practical. And although there's a show in New York right now, some guy who has these huge, amazing tempera paintings, and they go for astronomical prices, but I don't know how he does it. But I found, you know, because I was already into my mid to late 50s by the time I really got going, I had been working on life scale. You know, all my oil paintings, the figures were life size, so I could get a lot of detail in. But you know, your eyes, this kills your eyes. So sometimes I wear a headpiece with a magnifying glass, a magnifier on it. You know, if my eyes, because sometimes if I'm working, I'm on a computer all day. Then I come home and do, you know, do this for like 4 hours. That is a drawback. So, you know, it would have been great to have done it when I was younger, but frankly, I don't think I would have had the patience when I was younger, when I first learned about it. I probably would have given it a try and said, oh man, I can't do this. So that's kind of it.
I have a question.
Sure.
Have you ever used an egg separator when you were separating the egg? Would that help?
Not really. You know, the problem isn't separating the egg, it's getting the white off of it. So, you know, the egg separator will do just what I did with the spoon, but some people, you know, if they don't have, you know, if they're afraid they're going to break it. And a lot of times, if the eggs are older and the yolks are, you know, the sacs get weaker, you know, they break and then you can't use them. So, because you can't get the white, you know, it's got the white, everything mixed. So, but it's getting the white off, which the egg separator won't do that. So,
Right. Well,
yeah.
also, what was the name of the brushes that you used?
These are Trekell, Trekell, and it's called Protege rounds.
AK. Okay.
PR.
I'm sorry, I have a question. When you're
Sure.
Are the pigments you buy expensive?
No, they're not. They're actually it's way cheaper than like buying oil paint.
Is it?
Yeah. So for the common earth colors, like, oh, here's like a jar. So like for a common earth color, you know, this is my raw umber greenish dark. It's like 75 grams. It was $9.
Yes, geez,
It must last forever too.
But it could last me like 2 or 3 years, you know.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
longer.
yeah.
Like some of these jars of paint that I've had since I first started 10 years ago, and they're only like half gone because it's applied so thinly, it just goes forever. And
Yeah.
my problem is I see these really awesome colors and, you know, so they're not like mixed colors like you would get, like, you know, when they mix Payne's gray and a
Yeah,
tube
sure.
or whatever.
Yeah.
They're actual pigments.
Pigments,
you
yeah.
know? Yeah, so
Can
there's
you-
like,
Can you
Go ahead.
mix them easily though?
Can you mix them with oil? Just one.
yeah, like people make their own oil
Oh,
paint.
oil can,
Yeah.
Um,
yeah.
And that requires a little more grinding, and different pigments absorb the oil at different rates. That's where you get into that whole fat over lean thing.
Okay,
But
yeah.
the company that I buy a lot of them from, Natural Pigments, naturalpigments.com, they're on that handout. They do,
Okay.
they make, their paints are amazing, but they also sell the pigments, but they do online like free tutorials, like how to mix oil paint, how to use their mediums, you know.
Okay, good.
And if you join their little, there's a Facebook group called Painting Best Practices. So they run workshops that you pay for. They're out in California. You know, for people that want to like learn the old master rules and things for like putting your gesso on your canvas, and, you know, how to make sure your paintings are gonna not crack in 5 years, and, you know, that sort of thing. But they do, you know, they do watercolor, they do, and people just say, I've never bought, you know, their ready-made paints. It's called Rublev is the brand of their paint, but they sell, you know, the pigments too, and all the supplies for gilding, you know, for silver point and metal point and all these sorts of, and they do a lot of encaustic, you know, products,
Yeah,
that sort of
yeah.
thing. So,
But
but
you can mix these after you've made your paints. You can mix
oh,
them.
definitely. Yep.
Oh,
I'll mix
because-
colors. So, you
Yeah.
know, I do everything from putting pure color on, you know, just the pigment, but then I'll mix other colors, like I'll mix different flesh tones, and, you know,
Okay.
I'll just like you would in oil, I'll do like
Yeah.
a whole like line of different values of the flesh
Okay,
tones
all right.
and add them all out. It's the same as if you were doing like watercolor or gouache, you know,
Yeah.
on your palette. So, yeah, so I can show you.
Yeah.
So like I'll add a little burnt sienna to one of these. So, and then some white, and we'll get some flesh tone. Oh, you know, I like Venetian red. I like that for flesh tones better, actually. So here's a little Venetian red. I'll put that in there. So I get this kind of rusty.
Hmm.
The only thing is, when you add another color, you have to remember, and this already has water in it, but you have to remember that 50-50 ratio.
Yeah, so you gotta,
What do I
yeah.
have to do? I have to
An
put
egg.
another couple of drops of egg yolk in there, egg medium. Okay, so then I get this like deep, this would be like, you know, in a half tone kind of thing. I don't want to use this one. I have to use this one for wiping my brush, my thing. But then I have my titanium white over here.
You just use water to clean the brushes then, or how do you?
Yeah, soap and water, because it's got egg in it. So sometimes, you know, if it's sitting around, the egg gets a little hard.
Yeah, gunky.
So you have to get it out. So here I'm taking a little titanium white. I'll pull some of this over and do it over here.
You mentioned before that some people seal, you know, varnish them. I assume you don't, but
I don't.
how do you protect it from just general dust and stuff in 100 years? I mean, how is
You
it?
can wipe it off. You can wipe it off with a cloth. So here we have, this needs more egg, but so here's a flesh tone.
Yeah.
So they're quite delicate until they're fully cured, which is about 6 months. And then once that they hit that stage, like the egg has polymerized like all the way through, they're as tough as any oil painting. So
What
I can
is the
look-
word you're using for the egg? What did that, what happens when they're hard? What is the word?
it cures, it polymerizes. It's like, so there's like
Polarizers?
proteins in the egg. Yeah, so it's like when the egg is on your plate, you know, and it gets really that tough film. Well, that's what's on here. It's like that stuff that's stuck on your breakfast plate. But it
And
changes
it's-
over time, and you can speed it up by putting it in sunlight. So you know, that could speed it up a little bit. But so you could, it's easy to scratch, even with a fingernail, you could scratch it if you're not careful. I keep my nails pretty, you know, short. That's one reason. And I play a musical instrument too, so I have to have them
Yeah,
short
cool.
anyway. But you just have to be careful. So but if you look at the early Renaissance masters, you know, those paintings are in perfect
And
condition.
last, yep,
They're you know, better than a lot of oil paintings. So
Did they do the old religious icons?
yes, those were all, and
They're
they
all
continue to be in egg tempera.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they were.
yeah. And there's a couple of different techniques. I've kind of taken a couple of classes in it. Like some do like this technique with the, you know, the hatching and the marks. But then there's another one called the petty lac, where they kind of float on a little pool of color and they let that dry. Then they put the next
Wow.
value on, you know, so they get the cheeks gradually later and later toward the cheek, you know.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I know some contemporary icon painters, and I took a class up in the city once, you know, just to see what they did.
Yeah,
It was before
yeah.
I was doing egg tempera painting. I you know, I was disappointed though that we didn't get to do like the brushwork that I thought we were going to do, but some of
You did the gold leaf too, right?
yeah, we did
Yeah.
the gold leaf.
Yeah.
That's quite, you know, beautiful. So so this company, Natural Pigments, they sell all the gold leafing. There's a company called Iconophile that specializes in the supplies for icon painters. So like they sell the little, you know, the little panels that have the little ridge on the outside.
Yes, cool.
So you can get that. So, but if you could, anyone can join the Artists and Patrons of Egg Tempera Facebook group, and there are a lot of icon painters that are part of that, and they're posting from all over the world. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the finish of the egg tempera. I love the
Yeah,
way it reflects the
transparency.
light,
Yeah, transparent.
the transparency. It really is a different finish altogether.
yeah, it's like people look at a painting, you know, and they'll say, "Is that acrylic?" And I'll say, "No."
No,
And
no,
I'll say, it's like no, it's like nothing. That's what struck me about it.
yeah,
Its own thing, and not many people do it. And you know, there are people. There's this guy, Fergus Ryan. He's an Irish guy.
the name of Fergus, I think so, yes.
Ryan.
Yeah, and he used to be a pilot for Aer Lingus, and he took up painting, you know, when he retired. And he's this amazing egg tempera painter, but they're all like landscapes. And so because of the detail and the way he layers it, you know, it's all this sort of dry browny grass and stone, like the textures you can get. Like, and I'm pretty like a purist, but people do amazing things. There's a painter, Robert Vickery. If you look at his work, he was somewhat, you know, he was somewhat like an illustrator, but he did the paintings of figures on like large, like stone, like walkways or whatever that had chalk drawings on it. But, you know, there's a book, New Techniques for Egg Tempera Painting. It's out of print now. I had it for many years and I just gave it to somebody who could use it more than I did, because I don't really use those techniques. But you know, they do everything. Like they take the toothbrush and splatter the paint to get the stone look. It's like all these different techniques. Koo Shadler teaches all of that in her workshops. But it's almost like doing faux painting, you know, like wood and stone, and you can get amazing textures, you know. Meanwhile, it looks like amazing textures, but it's totally flat.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
not any impasto on this. So but it gets that, it does get that beautiful eggshell sheen to it. So
Well, I think it's amazing that you make your own palettes too, that you go to with such a degree.
oh
To
yeah,
get them the way you
yeah.
want, that's something.
it's and I just went back to the company because I thought, well, for it's hard for me to get them done, like to do a silver point drawing. I really don't want to put that much effort in, and I was trying it on masonite, and I couldn't get the stuff sanded as smoothly as I wanted. It's a different ground than I use for this for the painting. And so I think, why don't I go back to that company? It would be fine for silver point, and it would be, it's got a good enough ground on it. And they're not making any. I don't know if it's because of COVID, but it was like, they're in New Mexico, and Koo Shadler, my teacher, single-handedly kept that company alive. She would she talked somebody into doing it to make panels so people would have somewhere to buy them, because so many people won't try egg tempera because they can't get over that hump of having to make their own panels.
Yeah.
So if somebody said, they would say, oh, they do it for 5 years and they don't want to do it anymore, she would find somebody else to buy it from them. And she kept going forever. And I was disappointed that they're not doing any production now. So I'm gonna have to, I'm probably gonna just use the same technique as this for my silver points, because I like to have a really smooth surface for that too. So
Amazing.
yeah. So
Eileen, this is Nancy Conley.
Hi.
I missed why. Hi, I missed why you wear the. Hi,
I have a question.
I missed why you wear the glove.
Oh, it's so I could lean right on the
Lean on it.
lean on it. It's a very soft woolen. It's like one of those isotoner gloves. So it'll never. So I can lean on the painting while I'm working and not get transfer oil from my hand.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
What is the name? How do you spell the paintbrush again? Eileen?
Oh, Trekell.
How do you spell? I didn't know. How do you spell the brush?
Trekell is the manufacturer.
Yes.
And Protege is the series. Yeah, and they have two. There's a Protege, and then there's Protege Plus. I haven't tried the Plus yet. They're a little more expensive, but only like $1. So
yes,
but they make them in large sizes too. So like watercolorists use them. I know a guy that is, he uses them. I told him about them, and I said, man, I bought these brushes. I posted a little post on the Facebook page, and I said, these brushes are amazing. I just painted for 5 months and they're not worn out yet. And he tried them and he said, they're awesome. And he's using them. He's a watercolor. He does like tempera, but he's really more of a watercolor painter. And he just said, they're so cheap. So, but they're a great company. They make all kinds of brushes. So, and other supplies too, and they're very good. Like you place an order, it comes pretty quickly. Excuse me, they're very responsive. So
what year was the tempera popular? What years were they? In the 50s?
Pardon me?
Oh, tempera painters. What period did it cover?
Oh, when I was talking earlier?
Earlier, yes. When did you start the people painting with tempera paints?
Oh, they started back in the Egyptian times. So it was, and then it was the primary painting medium all the way up into the middle of the Renaissance.
Yes, I see.
Yeah, and then when if you missed the beginning, then the when oil painting became known, that took over because it was so much easier to blend. Yes. And they could get those deeper, the oil, you see that it has that wet look, the really deep. So that's why some people do egg tempera paintings and then they varnish them like an oil painting, and it takes all the colors into a deeper tone, into a deep, into a different realm. And, to me, it's like that kind of defeats the whole, I love that tempera look. So you know, a little bit dry, but
Yes.
you know, it kind of glows.
Mhm.
Took me a while to get to the point where I could get it to glow. So,
But they don't have expression. The models don't have expression in the tempera paints.
well, that just depends on the painter. Yeah.
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 The one picture that you did was that yours, the lantern, the with the boy or person's hand in front of the lantern?
That was George Tooker. So
Okay.
that I was showing it in the beginning. I was showing examples of other, like the people that inspired me to take up tempera. So
Yeah, that was really amazing.
yes, yes. And if you look, he's done quite a few that use light that way, and it's all about values and layers of paint. You know, if you
What
really
was his
look,
last name? Turco or?
pardon,
Last name
George
I spelled?
yeah, Tooker, Tooker. He passed away about 5 years ago. But he painted all the way from, you know, from the 50s when he was a young man until well into his 90s. He lived in Vermont. He ended up in Vermont, and he just stayed up there and painted. And you know, he has works like kind of scattered all over the place, but I think he was still alive when they did the show. About 10 years ago, they did a retrospective at the National Academy of Design up in New York City. I don't even know if that's still going now, but they brought all his like well-known works all together, and it was an amazing show. So
Excuse me, Eileen,
yes.
could you flip your screen again so that we can see you?
Oh, sure. I just have to move a few things.
I'm going to be going right now. It's super windy. I'm getting some very strange noises outside.
Oh, you're getting the storm?
Yeah, I want to go out and see what's going on. So goodbye. It was very interesting.
Bye. Thanks for coming.
Okay, bye.
Eileen, thank you so much. It was so interesting.
Okay.
Oh,
So you can see behind me, there's the painting that was that was one of the paintings that was in the show, in the thing, but you're seeing it reversed because the camera reverses everything.
oh,
There's my cabinet with all the pigments in it, except for the ones that I have here. Normally I work on this big long table, but it's facing the wall, so I had to put a folding table up in the middle. I can hardly move in here now.
That's fantastic. Beautiful work. Oh,
But I have right here, I have a drafting table. And then I also do, just for fun, I love woodcut printmaking. So I do woodcut prints. And so I have a big table over there for doing that, or for framing or that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So yeah.
Anybody else have any questions? So I think we're gonna look to wrap it up at 9. if that's
Yeah.
okay with everybody. Does anybody else have any questions? Yeah, Helen.
I would just like to say that this has been one of the most fascinating lectures I have ever heard. The story of your life and your growth as an artist, and the materials and the exposure and the people that you've met along the way it's just mind-boggling that you're a true artist.
artist.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Kind of as a hobby, and
It's
and
been a good life, you know. I've worked some pretty crazy day jobs, you know, but no matter what, I just kept going.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I mean,
You are a true artist. Yes.
attention to detail and your ability to communicate it as well. You know, not everybody can do that. You know, they can.
No, it is hard. And actually, I've worked in communications for many years. So, but it's only kind of as I've gotten older, I've got more comfortable speaking in public. Like I think my first big speaking, I was a visiting artist at Brookdale. They had that visiting artist series at Brookdale Community College. And I had to get up, they had 100 people there. I had to get up, you know, I had a show and I had to get up in front of all these people with a podium and kind of give this presentation. You know, it was different work, but I thought I was going to die. But once I got up there, it was kind of okay.
Well, I
So-
was there that night, I was thinking that.
Wonderful
You did
talent.
a fabulous job then too. So congratulations.
Oh, thanks so much. And thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.
Has been
I'm so
So,
glad I didn't miss this. Thank you
I
very
look
much.
forward to seeing one of your shows before I leave Monmouth County.
But if you would like to see one, not the virtual one, we'll send you a link because
Sure.
our Ruth Crown Memorial Show, the reception, the virtual reception is this coming Saturday at 1:30.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you send me the link, I'll try to hop on and see what's going on.
Good, okay.
So, but thank you so much for inviting me. So,
Thank you for coming. This is
you know, it's always nice when somebody, you know, by word of mouth, somebody contacts me, and I'm always happy to do this. So,
That's wonderful.
This has
Thank you
Okay.
again.
been very informative and very interesting.
thanks.
Helen said, Trish, thank you so much again.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.